Welcome to the Cryptoteacher. And guys, I come back with that video just to make you think. And this one is on the great Martin Luther King, who was only 39 years old when he was assassinated, trying to do good in a place of evilness. Now, in our history books, we never get the truth in our history books. Remember, history, his story. So we only hear his story told by the same people who assassinated him. So, of course, they're not going to give you the truth. Now, when it comes to Dr. Martin Luther King, I have a dream speech. We know he didn't write that speech. He's the one who actually gave it, but he didn't write it. I go over that in my book. But also, guys, you have a Dr. Martin Luther King who actually was against the wars, who were trying to help the poverty. That's what he was trying to do. And that was the main reason why he was assassinated, because that was a threat to the powers that be, as we can see now. Now, with the Poor People's Campaign, it was similar to universal basic income. Now, why does the New World Order want to bring on universal basic income? That's right, it's going to be digital, where they can actually program the money. So it's definitely coming to you, but it's going to be controlled. Remember, the New World Order's goal is to control the world, global power. But when it comes to Martin Luther King, guys, he actually survived the bullet on the balcony. That's right. And don't forget, anytime someone is assassinated, there's always a mole in there. So he had plenty of people that he thought was his friends who were actually his enemies. He actually was murdered in the actual hospital. You won't get that in your history books, people. Never, ever. We are going to listen to William Pepper, his attorney, who actually sued the government for Martin Luther King's assassination and proved that it was the government that was in it. You're talking about the military. Of course, the FBI, CIA, all of them was included. The local police force that was included. It actually blows your mind, but the fact is that when you understand history, it doesn't surprise you, because you have to understand these men are willing to do anything. Remember, guys, the power is in the people. And in one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s quotes, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And right now, when it comes to this time that we're living in, you're going to remember the silence of your friends. Y'all have a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest of the video.
So like I said, I spoke to Dr. Pepper earlier today. Here's what he had to say about the way Dr. Martin Luther King was actually killed.
Wow.
He wasn't killed from the bullet that hit him on the balcony. He was taken to the St. Joseph's Hospital, and he was killed in the emergency room of St. Joseph's Hospital by the chief of neurosurgery, Dr. Breen Bland, who came in when they were all working on him in the emergency room, and he said, "Get out of here, let that die." And as they moved out of the room, the last one out was a surgical nurse, Lula Mae Shelby. And when she heard them gathering up spit in their lungs to spit on Martin's body lying on a bed there, then she saw Dr. Bland take the catheters out of Martin's body and take the pillow from under his head and put it over his face and suffocate him.
Through 67, a decision had been made much earlier in his life to kill him. That he was actually singled out in the mid to late 50s by the forces who run this country, and who had him looked at and well targeted. There was to be an assassination on the Selma March. They had a military sniper ready to take him out, and he turned the wrong way, went across the bridge. That sniper was also a part of a backup group in Memphis on the day he was killed. But he struggled through that last year of his life, attempting to oppose the war and do what he had to do. The second and the most important thing that emerged from that conversation I had with him was his total commitment to the Poor People's Campaign. he said to me, "You know what the two roads to power are?" I said, "Yes, historically." He said, "Then you know they are money and numbers. And if you don't have the money, you have to have the numbers or get out of the game." He said, "We don't have the money, but we sure as hell can have the numbers." And that's where was born the idea of this Poor People's Campaign in Washington, D.C., where he was going to bring, at that time, they were talking about 500,000 people to D.C. To live, not march. Marches are great for personal expression and that type of catharsis. They don't do anything in terms of changing. Encampments. The same philosophy that Picture the Homeless has in terms of taking property, he advocated in terms of building a city, a tent city in the shadow of the Washington Memorial, and staying there. And every day, people from all over the country going and visiting their congressmen and their senators, and saying to them, "You must put back into the budget all these funds that have been removed because of the war." That was the major goal and mission that Martin King had that last year of his life. He was opposed in that by Jesse Jackson, and I have no time for Jesse whatsoever, and that will come out very heavily in the third book that I have in preparation. There's a trilogy on this case for me. And the third book will clearly demonstrate where Jesse was coming from, who Jesse really has been all of his political career, from the time he left South Carolina with a letter from Strom Thurmond introducing him to Richard Daley when he moved to Chicago, which most people don't know ever happened. That's Jesse Jackson. It gets much worse, but that's Jesse. So Martin was adamant about this, couldn't understand. One point, only time he ever lost his temper with anyone, I've been told by people who were at the meeting, was with Jesse. He said, "Jesse, what are you doing? You want to form your own organization, go form it. You want to work with us, work with us. But stop this obstruction." That was his goal, to bring down the masses. And I believe, frankly, that was the major reason they killed him. Not the war. The war was important. War was very important because it was providing billions of dollars to Brown and Root, who were the favorites of Lyndon Johnson. Going back to the Roosevelt days, Roosevelt gave Lyndon his first dam that Brown and Root built. So Johnson had a real investment in the Brown and Root type of operations, and there was a $1.23 billion deep dredging operation at Camaran Bay that they were involved in doing. The war was creating billionaires already back at that time, and so that was very important because they were going to lose that money. And so that upset them. But it was, in my view, the serious challenge of the March on Washington and the encampment in Washington is why they killed him. Because they saw that as the major threat to the structure they had created and that was run in America. They saw there almost was a revolution in France. 100 cities in the United States had burned that year. They were convinced Martin King would lose control of his 500,000 people when they didn't get the largesse back from the Congress, and that the more radical elements would take over and they would have a revolution they couldn't put down. They couldn't put them down. If it wasn't for André Malraux, the French Revolution in '68 wouldn't have been put down, but de Gaulle followed his very guided advice, and they were able to separate the communist labor unions from the students, and they were able to put down that revolution. But in the United States, the military was convinced that would not happen. That was a commonly shared view. And it had to do with the fact that there is power in numbers, and that was what was going to come to the surface. So he had that vision that last year, and I think without doubt that made it necessary for them to kill him. And they did on the 4th of April, 1968. They got him. He came into Memphis to support the garbage workers. There was on the 28th of March, there was a disruption. A march he had became violent. That was provoked again by the Blackstone Rangers and some folks out of St. Louis. It was blamed on a local group called the Invaders that had nothing to do with it. He was rushed to the Rivermont Hotel, which is the Holiday Inn Hotel. In that hotel, every room was bugged. They had over 17 microphones. They had them on the balcony outside. They had a relay station on the roof. They had them even in the bathroom. Everything he did and said was recorded. I learned all of this because I was able to befriend a member of Memphis Police Department Intelligence who had since retired, who was the guy who brought the coffee and donuts to the people who were running the operation. So they knew everything he was doing. They had infiltrated his own movement. He had traitors right next to him all the time. One of them knocked on his door 10 minutes to 6, as he was supposed to do, to bring him out. That same man, Reverend Billy Kyles, has lied to this day, saying he was in the room with Martin for the last 25, 30 minutes of his life. Built a career out of this. Never was in the room. Knocked on the door. Martin came to it. He was to have dinner, a barbecue dinner at Kyle's house that night. He spoke to him for a few seconds, closed the door. Kyles went down the balcony. Here's the door. Went down that side of the balcony and stood there for a long time. I always wondered why Billy Kyles stayed so far away when Martin came out and stood on the balcony. Never could figure that out. Took me quite a long time. Because Billy was great for photo ops, and he'd come up, but he stayed far away. I read the police surveillance report and put the guy on the stand who compiled it to document that Kyles, yes, did this, called him out, and then went down the balcony. They had him set up in every which way. His room was changed. He wasn't supposed to be at 306. He was supposed to be down in 202, the lower level, which was a guarded area. But that was changed by a phone call. So he was truly set up and killed. But at that time, 68, we all thought they had the right guy. We didn't know anything any different. There was this white guy in this Mustang that went driving away after dropping a bundle and had a rifle in that bundle. Didn't know anything about this. 9 years later, Abernathy called me and he said, we kept in touch over there, and he said, I'd like to go hear you interrogate Ray about a lot of issues that I don't think have ever been resolved. And I said, Ralph, what are you talking about? Thought he went round the bend. I said, Ralph, you think they have the right guy? He said, I don't know. He said, I said, Ralph, I know nothing about the case. Hadn't looked at it. Didn't want to look at it. We buried Martin in Atlanta. Bobby was running for the presidency at that point. I had been Bobby's Citizens Chairman as a kid, again, Westchester County, New York, Republican area. And Bobby invited us up to his room. I didn't go. Julian Bond and Spock and all the others went. I said, I'm through with politics. I don't want anything more to do with this. And I didn't like Bobby when I ran his campaign in Westchester. I found him arrogant and out of touch with poor people. And the Bobby they killed, though, was not the Bobby I knew 4 years earlier. Quite a different guy, and I regret now that I didn't have the chance to spend some time with him. But I didn't. And we buried Martin, and that was it. 9 years later, Abernathy calls and says, look, will you do it? Took me 6-7 months. He called me in 77, late 77. I prepared, and finally we went up, and I spent 5 hours interrogating James Earl Ray. I came away from that meeting shaken, because this was a diffident guy, passive, definitely not any more racist than most northern people from Quincy, Illinois would be. No virulence, nothing at all. And the issues he raised had never been answered. I hope the Select Committee, which reported in '79, would answer them. They didn't. I started then going into Memphis very quietly because I was troubled by the lack of answers. So that started 78, 79, and here we are, 31 years later. And I'm trying to put it finally behind me with this third book. And I guess I will do it now. But what it's taught me is you cannot come in and do a quick snapshot investigation of cases as complicated as this. You have to be there for a long period of time, and you have to wait for people to get close to the grave. And even the people you know are the most vicious racists that you can imagine. You keep a civil contact with them, because someday they may want to come forward, and they may want to cleanse their souls in some way before they go up. And that's exactly what's happened. It's exactly what's happened. As I started this investigation in '78, I used to meet with James and Ray frequently. He kept asking me to take his case. Mark Lane, who some of you will know, was a lawyer here from New York and an assemblyman. Mark was his lawyer. Mark dropped out of the picture at one point. So Ray asked me to represent him, and I refused. I said, until I'm sure, I don't believe you pulled the trigger. He's so dumb when it came to guns. And it was unbelievable dumb. I mean, here's a guy, when he was arrested at Heathrow Airport, he had 5 bullets in a pistol that they picked up, and the firing pin chamber was empty. And when I pushed him on that, he was so embarrassed. And he said, well, all right. One time, he said, I had a pistol in my pocket. I ended up shooting myself in the foot, and I resolved that I would never again keep a live bullet in the firing pin. It's incomprehensible. This guy. I knew he wasn't the shooter. I didn't know if he had any knowing involvement, and that took 10 years. 78, 88, took me 10 years to satisfy myself. James Earl Ray was just a patsy. He was someone whom they probably assisted in escaping from the prison in Missouri, and then monitored and put in the hands of a controller and used him at the right time. And as I followed his movements, I saw they kept him in Los Angeles for a period of time. They moved him into New Orleans. James was pretty well controlled. And eventually, of course, when I discovered that Raul, who was his controller, was a real person who lives about 35 miles from here to this day in Yonkers, New York, would you believe, had been an agency and a mob joint operative for many years, coming over from Portugal in '59, that when I identified Raul, and we went through that whole process of identifying him and having witnesses identify him, and a photo spread, I became convinced that James, in fact, was an unknowing patsy. So I agreed to represent him in '88. We went to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. I'm a member of that bar. We lost. And we went to the Supreme Court with a petition for certiorari. We lost. They denied it. It looked like the end of the road in terms of, this was in 1988, 1990. It looked like we were at the end of the road. And then I came up with an idea that, well, look, why don't we try to have a real trial on television? No scripts, heavyweight prosecutor, real defense, heavyweight judge, jury from all over the country. And sure enough, Thames Television in the UK said, yeah, we like that idea. Their connections with HBO brought it to happen. And we had then an opportunity to investigate, go further, and have a trial. We had a trial in 1993, early 1993. Went on for 10 days. The prosecutor was Hickman Ewing, who was Ken Starr's number 1 or 2 when he went after Clinton. And Hickman was former U.S. attorney in Memphis. Hickman waged a vicious, tough campaign, and he was a hard prosecutor. The judge was Marvin Frankel, former federal district court judge in New York, and the jury came from all over the country. We went through an actual jury selection process, but people from all over the country. Well, the trial went on for 10 days. Took the jury 7.5 hours. They came back and they found James O'Ray not guilty on the basis of just that evidence that we had at that point in 1993. I thought Hickman was going to have a heart attack because we were sitting there together and all. They didn't reveal the verdict to us until April 4, when they televised the April 4 when they televised it in 1993. Not guilty. 7.5 hours, not guilty. Now that television trial didn't mean anything. In fact, it was poo-pooed as just a television trial, entertainment, right? But it did bring people forward. All of a sudden we started getting calls from this one, people with evidence. So now it started to build of evidence that we didn't have before. So we started interviewing people all over and gathering and developing this evidence. And it also resulted in a long article in the Memphis Commercial Appeal by a guy called Steve Tompkins, who's an investigative reporter who spent 18 months investigating the role of military intelligence infiltrating in the civil rights movement, going back to Dr. King's parents, back into the 20s. This was going forward. This had been going on forever. And Steve revealed that. That was all useful and interesting historically, but what I found most interesting was one little paragraph in that article that said, and there was in Memphis on the 4th of April an Alpha 184 unit, a unit that is normally a sniper unit. And no one has ever explained why they were there. So I went to see Steve, who at that point was working for the governor of Tennessee in Nashville. And he didn't want to hear about it. He said, look, Bill, I spent 18 months. These people are scum. They'll kill you as soon as look at you. I said, well, Steve, I got a guy in prison who's probably innocent. Will you please help me? Finally, I just kept banging on his door, and he agreed to help. And what he agreed to do was to go he didn't know anything about the case, but take questions from me to some of these snipers who were still alive, and in particular case were living in Mexico. They had fled the country in early 70s because they thought there was a cleanup operation going on and they had to get out. So we did this for 18 months. Back and forth and back and forth. They would never meet with me because I'm raised a lawyer, but they said they would answer my questions. And they charged us $2,000 a meeting because they had to come from remote areas of Mexico. Well, they laid out their presence in Memphis, where they were, where the 2 guns were, laid out that Andrew Young was also a target. Each sniper had a spotter, but somehow the last minute, they were under orders they were briefed at Camp Shelby at 4:30 in the morning, and they were told specifically, shown the photographs of Young and King, that these were their targets, these were enemies of the state, and they had to be eliminated. But they were told you're not to fire until you're given orders by your captain. And the head of the team, Billy Ray Hodgson, was to give those orders. They were there in position. They described where Andy Young was, of course Martin on the balcony, and all of a sudden there was a shot. That shot came from they didn't know where, but they heard it, and it hit Martin in the jaw, just above the jaw, and of course that was the fatal shot. It was fired from the brush area behind a rooming house that sort of was opposite the Lorraine Motel. And one of the guys said they just thought the other team had shot first and they just got too anxious or something, but it was very unlike them because they were so highly trained and disciplined. These were special forces guys. But then the next order they received was to disengage, and they disengaged and they left the area the same way they came in. What I learned after that was that there were 2 photographers on the roof of the fire station who filmed everything. Still photographs, filmed everything. And one of them swept his camera, and the reason they were there, by the way, you say, well, why would they want to film? This is crazy. No, because the reason they were there was to film everyone and everything that was going on, so if there was anyone who might have seen something he or she shouldn't have seen, a person would have been identified. That's the purpose of that kind of photographic exercise. But one of the guys swept his camera from the parking lot up into the brush area and actually caught the sniper lowering his rifle and said, it wasn't James Earl Ray. I don't know who it was, but it definitely wasn't James Earl Ray. So I wanted to get as much as I could from these guys, and I wanted to get the photographs. And so for another year and a half, we negotiated to try to get the damn photographs, because one of them had taken those photographs to Costa Rica. He had a separate set of prints there. So Steve was my negotiator on that as well, and one day he made a great mistake. He used his own name going into Florida, into Miami, and his name ticked off a surveillance operation, and the FBI followed him to where he was meeting the photographer, and they were meeting in a big open area, and as he sat with the photographer, the FBI agent stuck a long lens camera out of the passenger side of their car, and the photographer saw it and thought he was being betrayed and being set up, and then just split. And so that blew our chance of getting those photographs. But nevertheless, we got the information, because what they saw, because we had been able to talk to the photographers for whatever that was worth. So going this route, we slowly picked apart the state's case in terms of the assassination. And it came to a head earlier than later. James had died in 1998. I had published a book in 1995 called Orders to Kill. That auction for that book was won by Harper Collins. Harper Collins, of course, as many of you know, was owned by Rupert Murdoch. Murdoch had the president of the company call me in London. I had moved my family to London in 1981 as a result of all kinds of harassments and threats in the States following my involvement with the case. So I think I could have little children, a 4-year-old son answering the phone, hearing threats against his father's life, and seeing guys in duck lines in the marsh area focusing their cameras on me whenever I left the house, things like that. So this is no way for kids to raise. So we moved to England and to Cambridge, and so I was commuting. Continually during the time I did most of this investigation. But the concept of more and more evidence evolving after Orders to Kill, Murdoch said, I won't publish your book unless you eliminate the whole chapter on the military. You got to get rid of that, because I've got an FCC problem taking over Fox. I've got IRS problems in terms of capital gains issues, and it goes to the bottom line of the News Corporation. So you've got to, I can't take on the government. You've got to forget about that. Military, you know it, they didn't do it. You know they were just standbys, backups. So what do you need them for? It was probably a mob contract that did it. And my response was they were so intimately involved that I couldn't leave out that whole thing. And as it turns out, of course, that was the case, because the colonel there was a colonel, John Downey, coordinated the whole operation from the 902nd Military Intelligence Group in the bowels of the Pentagon, the only one that's in the Pentagon. And John Downey coordinated this. He had the links to the mob. He knew everything. Maybe the only person who knew all aspects of this was Colonel Downey. So how do you leave that out? A slight digression. I've come to have very mixed feelings about John Downey because in 1996, January 1st, 1996, when the book came out, Orders to Kill, Steve got a call from someone saying he was John Downey. Said, I've read Pepper's book. He's basically right, but he's given me too much credit. I want to meet with you and set the record straight. For the next year and a half, nearly 2 years, meetings were held in Bermuda. I wasn't supposed to be there, so I was on the island quietly, giving Steve information, and he was supposed to be meeting with John Downey. Well, John Downey died in 1988, something like that. He was long gone. And he said to Steve, they're going to tell you I'm dead. They're giving me a new identity, and I've been living in Costa Rica ever since and all of that. So it went on. This was somebody whom they had put in to try to take control of the investigation. That's how they work. But I decided some years later, I haven't published this whole thing yet, a part of it will come out in the book, in the third book. I decided I wanted to try to learn more about this guy. So I doorstepped his daughter, who lives in the New York area. And he has two daughters, and one lives in this area. She said she didn't want to talk to me. I said, look, I think there's somebody been impersonating your father. I think he's not doing the family name any good. Would you please just listen to what I have to say? She invited me in, and I talked to her. And she told me some astounding things. She said to me, you know, my father was in Vietnam in '66 when you were there. And I understand he met you. And I said, I don't think so, because I think I probably would have remembered him. But she said, yes, she probably would, because he was that kind of charismatic guy. But in any event, he was there. I said, well, what was his job in Vietnam? She said, he was Lyndon Johnson's briefer. In American intelligence and military circles, and in the Russians as well, the rank of colonel is given to an intelligence agent who is assigned to the military. And the way the American intelligence structure works is that the CIA has been given a number of slots in every agency of government in the United States, from Interior to Customs. I mean, they're all to the Justice Department. They're there, and the military is certainly no exception. So John Downey was CIA, and he was Johnson's main briefer. He had the military, the military cover, but he was the briefer. And I said, what did he tell President Johnson about this war? And she said, he told Johnson time and time again, to get out of Vietnam? What are we doing there? This is a waste of blood and treasure, and there's just no reason for us getting involved in an internal national struggle. And Johnson used to ignore this. Ignore it. Finally, one day, she said, Johnson had had enough, and he pounded the table, and he said, John, I cannot get out of Vietnam. My friends are making too much money. When John Downey heard that, she said, his daughter said, she came home that afternoon and said to his wife, pack your bags. We're going to Canada. I'm not having anything more to do with this. And he had himself assigned to Canada. She said Johnson used to call once or twice a week. So where's John? What's he doing? She said, well, he's on special assignment. Yeah, right? So all of a sudden, this picture of this man changed in my mind. Here was a guy who was so upset about the corruption and about the waste of human life and misuse of American forces in Vietnam, that he was prepared just to say, I'm not going to do anything more about this. I have an oath and I'm going to follow it. And he left. I said, but then how do you explain role with respect to the killing of Martin King. She said he honestly believed that Martin King was a danger to the security of the United States. And he had no qualms about organizing that effort because he believed that Martin King was a serious danger. Now, he came from a fairly middle-class area in Pennsylvania. There's a whole cultural thing that goes on there. So there's not enough to rationalize or to in any way, of course, sympathize with that kind of attitude that he had about Dr. King. But what I'm trying to point out is that there's a grayness here in terms of the activities of a lot of these people, and that's I have found that with respect to Downey in particular. He wasn't making money. He wasn't primed to do any of that. He was a soldier who was given orders by the Assistant Chief of Staff Intelligence, William Yarborough. William Yarborough was the man who gave him the orders to carry out organize the assassination of Martin King. What Yarborough knew, and Downey didn't necessarily know, was that the FBI had been involved in a complementary but similar plan for quite a period of time. Hoover had identified Dr. King back in the late 50s, middle to late 50s, and he was focused on King as an enemy that he, Hoover, thought had to be gotten rid of. What I've now been able to uncover, which has never been revealed, is the fact that, of course, Hoover's number two, who was also his lover, Clyde Tolson, was the man Hoover sent around the country with bags of money to pay for some of the worst types of activity you can imagine in terms of killings of progressive people in America. Clyde Tolson was very much involved with the people in Memphis, Tennessee on the ground who carried out the assassination of Martin King. I have photographic evidence now. I have written evidence now. There's no question about that Tolson was a major planner in this whole operation, and it had a relationship with these people going back into the 50s, if not before. So the plot, in a sense, thickens. Martin was killed by a civilian firing from the bushes, who was a sharpshooter, Memphis police officer who was paid a sum of money to do it. He was the mechanic. That's all he was. He was the mechanic. He's alive and well. And I've confronted him in a non-threatening way, and I've asked him to talk to me. And he said that he would. And then he took off and he missed a meeting, and I found out that he went to visit his son, and one of my mutual contacts said, well, where do you go? He went to visit his son, small town in Virginia. His son works in this small town in Virginia. I said, well, what's this small town in Virginia? He said, it's Langley, Virginia. I said, okay. So, but I'm still struggling to try at the end of the day to bring that whole thing together and to have this conversation with this man whose name will remain anonymous. He's a very nasty piece of work, very dangerous guy, even at this age. But you know, that's the kind of end of 31 years of investigation where we go as far as we can with that, and we draw the story. The last thing we finally did with the case was to have a trial in 1999 that most people don't even know happened. Memphis, Tennessee, 30 days, district court, we had a trial. We brought 70 witnesses. That trial, the transcript of it is It used to be on the King's Center website. I think it's all over the place now. All the testimony of those witnesses. I summarized it in Active State, second book, laid out how Martin King was killed. And it was a trial that the King family brought, and I represented the King family in that case, against Lloyd Jowers. Lloyd Jowers owned Jim's Grill, behind which was the brush area where Martin was shot. Jowers was given the smoking gun by the shooter. He brought it back into the kitchen, broke it down. And we had 4 or 5 witnesses finally who nailed Jowers. He was afraid. So we sued him in civil court for wrongful death. He agreed to tell us everything that he knew. He didn't. But he told Dexter King, myself, Dexter and Andrew in separate interviews a great deal about that, about the killing, and he confirmed the shot came from the bushes and all of that. He lied about who the shooter was because he knew the shooter was still alive. So he gave the name of another policeman who was there and who went down over the wall, ran up Mulberry Street, got into a police traffic car and was taken away. Taxi cab driver in the driveway of the Lorraine Motel saw this guy come down over the wall and run up. Taxi driver was killed that night, murdered, because he saw something he shouldn't have seen. So the Jowers trial went, as I said, for 30 days. Took the jury 52 minutes, not 7.5 hours, 52 minutes, and they came back and they found for the King family against Lloyd Jowers and other unknown governmental agents and governmental conspirators. 70% responsibility in terms of damages was placed on the government of the United States, state of Tennessee, city of Memphis. 30% on Lloyd Jowers, because he was just a cog in that whole operation. So that's the history of, I apologize if people are aware of those facts and have read the couple of books so far, but that's a summary of the history without going into a great deal of the detail that came out of what is now 31 years of work. And for my sins, I